Daystar is in turmoil after Denise Boggs' shocking revelation about Joni Lamb. What she shared has left viewers speechless and is shaking the very foundation of the Christian network. As accusations fly, the drama unfolds, and no one saw this coming. With every word Denise dropped, the scandal grows bigger, and the church world is reeling. What did she say about Joni Lamb? You won't believe it. This revelation is beyond anything anyone expected. Stay tuned to find out what's really going on. In the final days of Marcus Lamb's life, the air was thick with uncertainty, but also clarity. The founder of Daystar, a global Christian network that had grown from a small dream to a worldwide ministry, was aware his time was coming to an end. His health was failing, but his mind remained sharp. The years of building a powerful ministry, along with the legacy of faith he had worked tirelessly to create, were about to be handed over. And Marcus knew exactly who he wanted to carry it forward. When Marcus called Denise Boggs, a close confidant and trusted counselor, it wasn't a casual chat. It was a mission. In his hospital bed, with his health deteriorating, Marcus was focused on the future of Daystar. He wasn't concerned with leaving behind wealth or prestige. What mattered to him was ensuring that the ministry would remain true to its calling, a beacon of hope, faith, and truth for the generations to come. It was a call not for advice, but for action. He wanted Denise to listen closely, write everything down, and make sure his instructions were carried out. Marcus' words weren't emotional ramblings, nor were they the frantic thoughts of someone clinging to life. They were deliberate, structured, and, most importantly, they were a plan. A plan for the future of Daystar, a ministry he had founded with his wife Joni and built over decades. He spoke clearly about the leadership of the network, and his vision was nothing less than a generational transition. He started by laying out exactly who he envisioned leading Daystar into the future. The first name he mentioned was Jonathan, his son. Marcus spoke with firm conviction, explaining that Jonathan was the one who had been prepared, spiritually and practically, to take the reins of the ministry. Jonathan, the man Marcus had publicly prayed over, was the one Marcus had always hoped would step into leadership. He was the first lamb who was supposed to carry on the vision, to take the ministry to new heights, while staying rooted in the faith and values that Marcus and Joni had always preached. But Marcus didn't stop with Jonathan alone. He knew leadership wasn't about one person, but about a team, and so he included Jonathan's wife, Susie, in the plan. Marcus knew that ministry leadership required more than just a strong vision. It required emotional and spiritual support. The kind of partnership that Susie could provide. She wasn't just a supporting role in Marcus' eyes. She was a vital co-laborer, someone who could stand beside Jonathan and carry the weight of the ministry alongside him. Beyond Jonathan and Susie, Marcus saw a place for his daughters, Rachel and Rebecca. They too had roles in the future of Daystar. Marcus didn't just pass the ministry to his son, leaving his daughters behind. He recognized their strengths and how they could contribute. And it wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about who was called, who was capable, and who understood the weight of responsibility. Even Rebecca's husband, J.W., was given a clear role in this vision. For Marcus, this was a family endeavor. It was a legacy not just for one person, but for all his children. However, one name was notably missing from Marcus's final vision: Joshua Brown, Rachel's husband. At the time, Joshua had been actively involved in Daystar's operations. He had a public-facing role within the network, and it would have made sense for him to be part of the future leadership team. But Marcus never mentioned him. Denise, who had listened intently to Marcus's instructions, immediately noticed the omission. She couldn't help but wonder why Joshua was left out, especially when he was so closely tied to the ministry. But Marcus didn't offer any explanation. He made no mention of why Joshua wasn't part of the future plan, and Denise, respecting his decision, didn't push the issue. That day on the lot, what mattered most to Marcus in that moment was the clarity of his vision. He wasn't just making suggestions or offering hopes for the future, he was giving specific instructions. He wanted Daystar to continue growing, but he wanted it to remain united, with each member of his family playing a part. It wasn't about who had the loudest voice or the most popular public image. It was about who was spiritually aligned with the ministry's calling and who had the humility to lead. Marcus spoke with purpose and urgency. This wasn't just about a transition, it was about a legacy. He knew the day was coming when he wouldn't be there to lead Daystar anymore. and he wanted to make sure that the network would stay true to its mission, not lost to power struggles or disunity. He trusted Denise to carry this plan forward. He told her clearly to make sure his instructions reached the right people, especially Joni and the rest of the family. Marcus had spoken. His will was clear, and Denise understood the gravity of what she had been entrusted with. But what followed after Marcus's death was a far cry from the smooth spiritual transition he had envisioned. What Marcus had laid out with love and precision quickly unraveled. Joni, his wife, stepped into the role of leader at Daystar, but she didn't just fill the gap temporarily as the grieving widow. No, Joni took full control. And as for Jonathan, the man Marcus had chosen, prayed over, and carefully prepared for leadership, he was quietly removed. Jonathan wasn't just sidelined, he was pushed out of the ministry that his father had built. This wasn't the peaceful transition that Marcus had hoped for. Instead of unity, there was division. Instead of spiritual alignment, there was control. The plan Marcus had laid out with so much care was dismissed. Jonathan and Susie, who were supposed to be the next generation of leaders, were removed without explanation, and their absence was felt deeply by those who had watched them grow into their roles. Denise Boggs, who had carried Marcus's final instructions, watched in heartbreak as the vision Marcus had worked so hard to create began to fall apart. What she had been entrusted with wasn't just a message, it was Marcus' legacy, and now it seemed to be slipping away. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She knew that the truth needed to be heard. What Marcus had said was not vague or unclear, it was purposeful, and that purpose was now being ignored. The fallout from Marcus's final vision raised more questions than answers. Why was Jonathan removed? Why was the plan ignored? And most importantly, how could something so clearly laid out be so easily cast aside? As Daystar's future became uncertain, many began to wonder whether Marcus' legacy was being erased by those who were supposed to honor it. The story of Marcus Lamb's final vision is one of faith, leadership, and, ultimately, a warning. When a man works his whole life to build something, will his legacy truly endure, or will it be lost to power and control? When Marcus Lamb passed away, the world of Daystar and its millions of viewers were rocked. It wasn't just the loss of a founder, but the loss of a visionary who had spent decades building a global Christian network, preaching faith, hope, and inspiration to millions. For many, Marcus wasn't just a figurehead. He was a steady, guiding force, someone who always appeared sure of his purpose and direction. And in his final days, he made one last, deliberate move to ensure that his ministry would remain strong. But what happened after his death wasn't the peaceful transition he had envisioned. The plan he laid out in his final moments was systematically ignored, and the results were deeply troubling. The conduct was Marcus had always known the importance of legacy. He understood that building something meaningful required careful planning for the future. And as his health deteriorated, he became more focused on the steps he needed to take to ensure that Daystar would continue on its mission long after he was gone. That's why, just before his death, he made a clear and direct call to Denise Boggs. Denise was not just a counselor to Marcus. She was someone he trusted deeply, someone who had been with him through many personal and professional challenges. Their relationship went beyond a professional one. It was rooted in years of shared experiences and mutual respect. When Marcus called Denise from his hospital bed, he didn't speak like a man who was nearing the end. There were no long, emotional ramblings. There were no vague musings. His words were deliberate, focused, and filled with purpose. He was giving instructions. Clear, thoughtful instructions. He wasn't looking back at his life or reflecting on what he had built. Instead, he was already thinking ahead, making sure that Daystar would continue in the way he had always envisioned. And the most important part of that vision was the leadership that would take over. For Marcus, it was clear who should take the helm. His son Jonathan was the one he had prayed over, trained, and prepared for leadership. Jonathan had always been by his side, learning the ropes, sharing the responsibility, and understanding the weight of what Daystar represented. Marcus believed with all his heart that Jonathan was ready to lead. He wasn't just choosing him because he was his son. Marcus saw Jonathan as someone spiritually equipped to carry the torch forward. Jonathan wasn't just the next logical step. He was the one who had been called, prepared, and blessed by God to step into this leadership role. Marcus's words about Jonathan were not sentimental or wishful thinking. They were firm, intentional, and rooted in years of spiritual preparation. But Marcus didn't stop with Jonathan. He knew that leadership wasn't just about one person. It was about a team, about a family that could carry the weight together. And that's where Susie, Jonathan's wife, came in. Marcus knew that a strong leader needed a partner, someone who could support him, challenge him, and help him carry the load. Susie was not just to be Jonathan's support system. She was a crucial part of the leadership team, someone who could help guide the ministry and stand beside Jonathan as a co-laborer in the work. Marcus wasn't just handing over a job to Jonathan, he was entrusting him with the future of the entire ministry, and he knew that Jonathan's success would depend on Susie's partnership and support. Marcus' vision didn't stop with Jonathan and Susie. He also wanted his daughters, Rachel and Rebecca, to have clear roles in Daystar's future. He knew that they, too, had a part to play in the network's growth. Like Jonathan, Rachel and Rebecca had been involved in the ministry from the beginning, and they had shown that they were capable and dedicated. Marcus assigned them roles based on their strengths, and he trusted that they would help guide the network through its next phase. Even Rebecca's husband, J.W., was included in the plan. It was a family operation, and Marcus believed that each person had something to contribute. However, one person was conspicuously absent from Marcus's plan: Joshua Brown, Rachel's husband. At the time, Joshua had a visible role at Daystar and was actively involved in its operations. He was, in many ways, an integral part of the network's day-to-day function. But for reasons that were never fully explained, Marcus did not mention him in the succession plan. Denise immediately noticed this omission. She couldn't help but wonder why Joshua wasn't included in the vision Marcus had for Daystar's future. But Marcus didn't offer any explanation. He simply laid out his vision without hesitation, and Denise respected that. She didn't press for answers, as she trusted that Marcus had a reason for everything he said and did. What mattered most to Marcus in those final moments wasn't the legacy he had built. He knew that Daystar was in good hands with Jonathan, Susie, Rachel, and Rebecca. What mattered was ensuring that the ministry would remain true to its mission, its values, and its calling. Marcus didn't want Daystar to fall apart or become embroiled in a power struggle after he was gone. He wanted to see a smooth, faithful transition, one that would honor the work that had come before it and carry it into the future. When Marcus passed away, it seemed like everything should fall into place. Jonathan, the man Marcus had handpicked to lead Daystar, was supposed to step in. Supported by Susie, Rachel, Rebecca, and J.W., the network was poised for a smooth handoff of leadership, just as Marcus had envisioned. But what happened next was a shock to many. Instead of Jonathan stepping into the leadership role, Joni Lamb, Marcus's wife, took control of Daystar. Joni, who had been involved in the ministry from the very beginning, was a strong figure, but she was not the person Marcus had chosen to lead the network. What followed was nothing short of a family power struggle. Jonathan and Susie were quietly removed from their positions, and the transition Marcus had so carefully laid out was ignored. Instead of the unity Marcus had hoped for, there was division. Instead of a spiritual handoff, there was a battle for control. Denise, who had been entrusted with Marcus's final words, was devastated by what she saw. She had faithfully carried out Marcus's instructions, but now, in the wake of his death, the very vision he had worked so hard to create was crumbling. Denise felt a deep sense of responsibility to speak out, to share what Marcus had said, to make sure that his vision was not forgotten. But it was clear that the forces at play within Daystar had no intention of honoring his wishes. The plan Marcus had laid out was simple and clear. It wasn't about power. It was about stewardship. It wasn't about popularity. It was about faithfulness. But when Marcus' plan was ignored, the question that everyone began asking was, why? Why were Marcus's clear, purposeful instructions thrown aside? And why was Jonathan, the man Marcus had prayed over and prepared for leadership, pushed out of the very ministry he was meant to lead? The events that followed Marcus's death have left a deep scar on Daystar, and the unanswered questions about what really happened continue to hang over the network. Marcus's plan was clear. It was intentional. It was rooted in faith, and yet it was suppressed. The legacy he built is now at risk, and those who followed him are left wondering, what went wrong? In the final days of Marcus Lamb's life, when his health had deteriorated, he knew his time was running out. But there was something more pressing on his mind than his personal condition: the future of Daystar. Daystar wasn't just a television network. It was a ministry he had built with his wife, Joni, from the ground up. For decades, they had poured their hearts into the work, broadcasting a message of faith, hope, and healing to millions of viewers worldwide. And as his health faded, Marcus was determined to leave behind a legacy that would honor everything he had worked for. Knowing the end was near, Marcus didn't want to leave Daystar in disarray. He wanted to ensure a smooth transition of leadership, one that would keep the ministry aligned with the values he had spent his life promoting. So, in his final days, he made a critical decision. He called Denise Boggs, a trusted counselor and confidant, and asked her to record his last wishes for the future of the network. This wasn't a casual request. It was a deeply intentional moment where Marcus made sure that his vision for the future of Daystar would be heard and respected. Marcus's instructions were clear, deliberate, and free from any ambiguity. He wasn't speaking from a place of desperation or fear. He was focused, calm, and resolute, knowing that his health was failing, but his mind was sharp. The transition of leadership for Daystar wasn't just a family matter for him, it was a spiritual decision, one that carried the weight of years of ministry work and a deep sense of calling. What Marcus had in mind wasn't about legacy for legacy's sake. It was about making sure the ministry would continue to serve its mission and remain true to its founding principles. He knew exactly who he wanted to lead Daystar in the years to come. His son, Jonathan, was the one he had prayed over, the one he had spent years preparing to carry the mantle of leadership. Marcus had seen something in Jonathan from the beginning, a quiet strength, a genuine faith, and a sense of calling that went beyond family obligation. It wasn't just that Jonathan was his son. Marcus believed with all his heart that Jonathan was chosen by God to lead. For Marcus, Jonathan was the first lamb who was meant to take the lead in the ministry. But Marcus didn't stop with Jonathan. He knew that leadership wasn't a solitary pursuit. It required a team, a family working together to carry the weight. Jonathan wasn't meant to lead alone. His wife, Susie, was just as integral to the vision. Marcus saw her not only as Jonathan's partner in life, but as his partner in ministry as well. Susie was strong, grounded, and spiritually attuned to the work that needed to be done. Marcus understood that ministry wasn't just about preaching and leading on camera. It was about a whole life dedicated to the mission. Susie's role was essential, and Marcus knew that she would be the one who could stand beside Jonathan and help him navigate the challenges ahead. Beyond Jonathan and Susie, Marcus had also envisioned a role for his daughters, Rachel and Rebecca. They had been involved in Daystar for years, and Marcus knew they both had valuable strengths to contribute. He didn't just want them involved for the sake of family tradition. He wanted them to help guide the network as it moved forward. Rachel and Rebecca were both spiritually mature, dedicated to the cause, and had the experience necessary to take on meaningful leadership roles. And Marcus didn't just think of his children. Rebecca's husband, J.W., was also included in this future vision. Marcus knew that the success of Daystar wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about finding the right people who had the heart and vision to serve the ministry's mission. And for Marcus, his family was at the center of that vision. However, there was one glaring absence in Marcus's plan. Joshua Brown, Rachel's husband, was an active and visible part of Daystar at the time. He was involved in its operations, had a public role, and was respected by many within the ministry. But Marcus did not include him in his succession plan. This omission didn't go unnoticed by Denise Boggs. She couldn't help but wonder why Joshua's name was left out. It wasn't that Marcus had any ill will toward Joshua. Marcus had always been a fair and thoughtful leader. But for reasons that were never fully explained, Joshua was not part of the future leadership Marcus had so clearly envisioned. Denise respected Marcus's decision not to mention Joshua, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his absence was a significant part of the plan. She didn't press Marcus for an explanation, but it left her with a sense of unease. What was the reason behind the exclusion? Was there something more to it than Marcus had let on? Denise never got the answer, but she took Marcus's words at face value. What mattered now was fulfilling his wishes. She would ensure that Marcus' vision would be shared with the family, and the future of Daystar would be set on the path he had laid out. But when Marcus passed away, the plan he had outlined so clearly began to unravel. Instead of Jonathan stepping into the leadership role, Joni Lamb took control. Joni, who had been a steady presence in the ministry from the beginning, didn't just take a temporary leadership role. She took full control of Daystar, sidelining Jonathan and Susie. No explanation was given to the public about why Jonathan, the man Marcus had chosen to lead, was removed from the network. There was no formal announcement, no discussion of the transition, and no acknowledgement of the plan Marcus had carefully crafted. It seemed as though Marcus's vision had been ignored entirely. Behind the scenes, the situation grew more complicated. Insiders began to hear rumors of manipulation, intimidation, and a power struggle within Daystar's leadership. People started to question why Jonathan and Susie had been removed. Some believed that Jonathan's removal wasn't his choice, that he had been pressured out of his role, perhaps even through spiritual abuse. Those who had been close to Marcus' plan began to feel the sting of betrayal. It was as if the very foundation of what Marcus had worked so hard to build was being torn apart. Denise, who had faithfully recorded Marcus's final instructions, couldn't stay silent. She knew what Marcus had said. She had heard his words with her own ears. And she knew that Marcus had intended for Jonathan to take the lead. The more she saw the transition unfold, the more troubled she became. She felt that the truth needed to be heard, and so Denise decided to speak out. She shared Marcus's final vision with those who had been part of the process. She spoke of how clear and specific Marcus had been in his instructions. But as the months went on, it became evident that his plan was being suppressed. The silence from Daystar's leadership was deafening. Joni, now at the helm, never publicly addressed Marcus's plan. There was no open conversation, no family discussion. It was as if Marcus' wishes didn't matter anymore. For those who had followed Daystar for years, this was a heartbreaking betrayal. Daystar had always been built on trust. Trust in the leadership, trust in the message, and trust in the integrity of the ministry. But now, that trust was being shattered. The people who had given their time, money, and faith to Daystar felt betrayed. They had supported a ministry that they believed was built on transparency and faithfulness. But now they were witnessing something entirely different. The removal of Jonathan and Susie wasn't just a change in leadership. It was the erasure of Marcus's vision. A legacy that had been carefully built was now being dismantled. And the most troubling part was the silence that followed. Why hadn't Joni addressed Marcus's plan? Why hadn't she honored his wishes? And what about Joshua Brown? Why was he never mentioned in the succession plan? These questions remain unanswered, and the silence only deepens the suspicion and frustration felt by many. In the end, the plan that Marcus had laid out was suppressed, ignored, and ultimately erased. What was supposed to be a smooth transition of leadership became a battle for control, and the ministry that Marcus had built began to shift in a direction that no one could have predicted. For those who had trusted Marcus, his final vision now seemed like a distant memory. The question that remains is whether Daystar can ever truly honor the legacy Marcus left behind, or if the forces of power and control will continue to shape its future.